Hello and welcome to our issue of Our Take. I'm Ashwin Ahmad and I'm joined by my colleagues Surya Gangadharan and Amitabh Revi to discuss the Afghanistan peace process. Amitabh, if I may turn to you, the US has certainly not been happy with the Afghan government. The US Undersecretary called the Afghan NSA for some harsh words because of the talks with the Taliban. What is your assessment of this and how do you see it going forward?
If I just take you back 2 months when we actually interviewed the National Security Advisor Mohib when he was in Delhi, he raised a Afghan fable which his mother used to tell him about a lady who used to live on top of a mountain and would come down with a calf every day so that the calf could drink from the stream and then take the calf up again. And the parable is about patience and perseverance. And though he was talking about himself, he was also talking about the larger Afghan country and the patience and perseverance that they have. So clearly developments, especially the comments that he made at two institutions in Washington, D.C., are showing at the very least that the NSA has lost patience with the US. And if you look at it broadly, he's representing the Ashraf Ghani government. So has the Ashraf Ghani government itself lost patience with not being included in the peace process that Zalmay Khalilzad is having with the Taliban?
Surya, I just want to take this forward a bit. The Afghan NSA are very unhappy with Zalmay Khalilzad. There is even an argument that, he is seeking a political role for himself in Afghanistan. How do you see this? How justified are they in their, criticism of Khalilzad? Do you think he's done a fair enough job?
Well, Khalilzad's motives are suspect. It's widely been reported in various sections of the media that he has long-term interests in the US where he is a citizen, and he has political interest there. And he has given some assurances to the Trump administration that he will sort matters out. And some of the speculation, as you've mentioned, is that he wants to be in kind of a #1 position in Afghanistan. Although why on earth, boggles the imagination. Nevertheless, this is some of the reports going on. And Khalilzad has a controversial past. He is not regarded in very positive terms in Afghanistan. And in the Afghan scenario, you have lots of leaders with murky connections. So Khalilzad is one of them. And that's probably why, and there's also the fact that what is the future of the elected government of President Ghani in the event that a guy like Khalilzad comes in, So a lot of the issues are tied up together.
And the point that Surya is talking about Khalilzad and how he's viewed in circles in Afghanistan. Now, you go back in history, he's been associated. He's an Afghan who moved out like Ghani did during the period when there was a lot of tumult, etc. And it's interesting that the third person who also was either trained abroad or like these two got education abroad is one of the Taliban negotiators, Tanikzai. So they all three moved out at the same time. Tanikzai was trained in some Indian military establishments as well. Now, Khalilzad was the US ambassador to Afghanistan, post that to Iraq, and then the permanent representative at the UN as well. He was responsible in some manner for the Afghan constitution, which now is, we really don't know what's going to happen because the presidential polls, Surya is referring to the elected government, that's again been pushed back to September 28th. There's no mention of what happens in that interim period when the actual tenure is over. So Khalilzad has been involved in Afghanistan in the past. He's not looked at too favorably within Afghan circles, and even though the top diplomat, the NSC, had such harsh words about him, many saying that even if he didn't couch it in diplomatic terms, he was actually right.
Amitabh, I want to ask you now about the draft agreement. The US and the Taliban have signed a draft agreement. What exactly does that entail?
They've reached a draft agreement.
Yeah,
it's not been finalized.
Okay, they've reached a draft agreement. Now, what exactly does that entail? And, what does it mean for the Afghan government and the various players in the region?
That's the problem, that they're saying we weren't involved at all in this stage and you've already reached a draft agreement. Now, from the information that we get from Khalilzad himself and from the Taliban statements, there are four core issues, which is the withdrawal of foreign forces, which is that Afghanistan will not be used by terrorist groups against any other country. You're talking about intra-Afghan talks, which have not been dealt with, and a comprehensive ceasefire. So it's the first two that they've reached a draft agreement on. It has to still to be finalized before what they call intra-Afghan talks, which means the Afghan government and other various leaders, including possibly Hamid Karzai and social activists, etc., will also be involved. So that's, I think, the grouse that the Afghan government has had for a long time. When these talks started, Ashraf Ghani himself apparently found out about what had happened in one of the rounds from a Taliban statement. So that's the kind of anger, distrust among two allies here. So they are saying, you are talking to a Taliban which has killed over 2,400 US military personnel, another 1,700 civilian contractors, 45,000 Afghan military personnel have been killed, according to Ashraf Ghani himself, since he took over in 2014, but you don't trust us. So
Surya, I want to move the focus a little bit away from the Afghan government. Now, India's position has always been that it doesn't talk to terrorists, but we've seen the United States, Russia, etc., putting the Taliban on the high table. So now, with the draft agreement, at least the Taliban are seen as the negotiators. What does this mean, the implications for India in this, especially down the road?
Well, it's interesting to note that this draft agreement is only between the Taliban and the US, you know. It excludes a whole lot of other characters, including the Russians, the Chinese, the Pakis and others, Iran. And in that sense, for India to feel outside is well, we have to share that feeling with a lot of others. Yes, the Russians are talking to the Taliban, even the Chinese are, the Pakistanis are behind them. But do all of them want to see a Taliban government in power in Kabul? I'm not so sure. And can a deal between the US and Taliban alone settle all the issues that are internal to Afghanistan? I don't think so. So frankly, I think India needs to hold its nerve. We have a lot of stakes there, and we've built up a lot of, we built up our position there over the last decade or so. And yes, our power has been predominantly soft. So we haven't yet gone for that hard option. And if there is a hard option, what is it? We don't know. We don't want to go down the road taken by so many others. So right now, I think it's wait and watch. We'll have to see where it goes.
It's interesting because when Zalmay Khalilzad briefed the various regional powers, he's gone to, I would say, about a dozen countries, including all the Central Asian republics, apart from Iran, of course, he wouldn't touch. The last on the list was India. He came to India after he had gone to Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, even Belgium, NATO headquarters. Yes. But what's interesting is after these incidents, they may not be necessarily linked, or they could be. Foreign Secretary Gokhale, who met Khalilzad when he was in Washington, D.C., and it's become public knowledge that official sources have made it public, that India has made it clear that even if there is a withdrawal of, or drawdown of some sorts that the Americans and Donald Trump reaches, that there should be no interim government. That's an official position that has been made public, that the Afghans should choose their own government. So we've played our card on that. Of course, whether we have any leeway in terms of the negotiations, probably not. But when you're talking about India, yeah, that's the stand we've taken.
I also now want to bring in the role of Pakistan. So Pakistan has played a very active role in the Afghan peace process, etc. Now, what would India be wary about regarding Pakistan's role in this, and what should be our strategy going forward?
I think we'd be most wary is, again, what you're saying is, if the Taliban in any form comes back into power, how does it do that? Who are they? What power do they have? Is there going to be an interim government? Is there going to be some kind of a caretaker government? That's a no-no for us. We don't want the Taliban unless the Afghans themselves agree to that. Pakistan's role is being cited. They themselves, Imran Khan, the chief of army staff, have all talked about, the foreign minister, of how they have brought the Taliban to the table. So they're now in the good books of Donald Trump again. It seems there might be some kind of a meeting with the top Pakistani leadership, which I presume is Imran Khan. But Mullah Baradar, who's the second in command in the Taliban, is part of those talks. So these are the highest level talks so far. Some reports that Secretary Pompeo may also land up for the next round of talks. But Afghan-Pak tension Now, even people who are in government, Ashraf Ghani has held his horses so far, but when you look at people like Amrullah Saleh, who has been appointed the Interior Minister, he was the NSA before that as well, are always talking about Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, about how the Taliban is based in Pakistan. Imran Khan's statement just after the NSA's statement in Washington, when he, in Bajaur I think it was, when at a rally he said that peace is coming soon, there'll be a new government. And how does he know that? When the Afghan government themselves don't know that. So Pakistan's role is completely suspect, and I think that red line that India would have is that the Taliban, how, if at all, are they part of the government in future government?
From Pakistan, I want to bring in the issue of terror now. When we talk about Taliban coming to the high table, what does it mean for terror in the region? Because Taliban are a terror group itself. Will that encourage? Will they be in concert with other terror groups possibly? And will that impinge on India's security?
Well, that's the million-dollar question really. I mean, as Amitabh had mentioned, the Taliban have given some kind of an undertaking to the US that they will not allow Afghanistan to be used by other terror groups. All that's very well as a declaration, but in practice,
how do you give that assurance? How do you assure it?
Given your own background and the fact that you've been supported by the Pakistanis for so long, and the fact that within your group there is this Haqqani network, which is so active there. There's also the fact that the Taliban have given succor to guys like Al-Qaeda guy Bin Laden and others. And there's also reports that perhaps the Pakistanis are fielding a B team, in the form of the Islamic State. So it's a potpourri of terror groups here, and there's no easy solution really.
When you're talking about these assurances, even if the Taliban gives an assurance, now how will Donald Trump have a good deal? He needs to withdraw, and he needs to be assured in some manner. How do you formally do that? Like Surya is mentioning, it's the Al-Qaeda. Now, if you look at the past of how Al-Qaeda leaders and Zawahiri has been owing allegiance to whoever's at the top of the Taliban list. When it was Mullah Omar, even though we didn't know he was dead for 2 years, the Al-Qaeda was still swearing allegiance to him. When Mullah Mansoor came in, again the same thing happened. Zawahiri pledged allegiance to Mullah Mansoor before he was killed in a drone strike in Pakistan. Now that Akhundzada is there, he is touted as the Amir al-Muslimin, which is the founder of the Faithful, the leader of the Faithful, which is what Mullah Omar is thinking. It's the Al-Qaeda, it's the Haqqani network. Sirajuddin Haqqani is the #2 military commander in the Taliban umbrella. The Islamic State in the Khorasan province that Surya was mentioning, Pakistan's B team, if something goes wrong with the Taliban and Taliban breaks out from their control. There are so many, there are about 20 networks there. How do they give that assurance? And how is the US assured enough to say to its domestic circles that yes, now we can withdraw because we've
it does
achieved
seem that Trump is looking for a fig leaf to pull his troops out, and claim some kind of a victory and just get the hell out of there.
That is what I wanted to bring in, the issue of Donald Trump. Now, as you said, he is desperate to exit from Afghanistan and pass the mantle on to other countries. We have this. We have a scenario where the Taliban are at the high table. You have the Afghan government being ignored. We have a draft agreement that is really not is just a draft. And we have uncertain state actors. So what do you see, both of you see going forward? I mean, for all Afghanistan and all the state actors, what do you see in maybe in the unfolding months and coming
I think there's no doubt that this is ideally something which should be handled by the region, working cooperatively together if they're able to, reconcile their interests. And I think all of them share common concerns about Taliban and terrorism and all that. And at the end of the day, it would also be in Pakistan's interest to have a stable government there, whether of the Taliban makeup or something else, but something stable. And one is not very sure if a Taliban government is something which the Pakis actually want. There are so many reports we see in the Pakistani media about the dangers of a Taliban government in Kabul. So the whole issue is one of reconciling all these, the interests of regional countries to settle on something which can bring stability to Afghanistan.
And to answer your question, I'll use Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad's own words, just one sentence. He said the route to peace is never straight. Now, what route it takes